everyone. If you don't mind coming on screen so we could see who you are. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay. Uh,
Okay, Tom,
all right. Yep.
go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tom Daly, and I'll be the moderator for today's meeting. Our guest today is Ms. Sharon Hinton. She is an educator, activist, author, writer-producer, director, and founder and executive director of Black Teachers Matter, along with many other accolades and responsibilities. I am pleased to welcome her to our monthly Natick for Black Lives Matter Community Forum. I would also like to introduce Deborah Mitchell, who is the founder and president of Natick for Black Lives Matter. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you, Tom.
All right, Ms. Hinton will now make some opening remarks, and then we will open up the forum for questions from the audience. Ms. Hinton, the floor is now yours.
Good morning, everyone. Grand Rising. If you are a human being like me, and I'll say a seasoned human being, meaning you're up in years and you've spent some time on this planet, you're probably just glad to say good morning every morning, considering we're still dealing with the pandemic. And although people are unmasked, some people are unvaccinated, vaccinated. And after going through really a horrific 2 years, when you think about the millions of people across the globe who have lost their lives to COVID-19, I'm just glad to be awake. And so I just recently celebrated a birthday and turned 67 years old. And also had a 50th reunion at my prep school, my high school, which I'll talk about later. So I thank you for taking this time this morning. And I'm not discouraged in small gatherings. I think most social movements and small gatherings and effective meetings actually most movements started with small gatherings around a coffee table, around a campfire, in a conversation. And so I appreciate this time this morning, on a beautiful morning of 74 degrees. Good Lord, summer has arrived in Massachusetts.
Thank you, Jesus.
Well, for every morning that I wake up. So I got some information from my very dear friend, Deborah Mitchell Younger. And when I had to think about how long I've known her, decades, literally decades. I've known her for a while in the church, outside of the church. We're both activists. And so I appreciate her inviting me to Natick for Black Lives Matter. I'm the founder and executive director of Black Teachers Matter. There's not any organizational affiliation, and I'll explain how that name actually evolved and the group evolved briefly. We've got a few moments, and I actually, if you can put in the chat, hi, Miss Peggy.
Hi.
I've known Miss Peggy forever too. We're family.
That's right.
Guys that are here in the this meeting this morning can put in the chat your name and why you joined Black Lives Matter, or why you think Black lives are important. That would be great for me. While I'm giving you a little bit of background and what I learned about Natick. Now, I have to be honest with you, I didn't know, even though I've grown up mostly in Massachusetts, I've lived other places, I didn't know much about Natick other than the mall and the beach. I mean, sorry. And so I really had to do some research on Natick, and 85.4% white. These are some of the most recent statistics because we just did a census. The country just did a census. 2% African American, 0.1% Native American, 7.2% Asian, 0.0% Pacific Islander, 0.5% from other races, and 2% from 2 or more races. And for Hispanic or Latino of any race, 3% of the population. So the population, according to the census, in April 1st, 2016, there were 33,006 residents of Natick. April 4th, 2020, there were 37,006. So Natick has increased. However, the demographics racially, pretty much the same. Natick High School, not that I think I'm preaching to the choir. Hi, Jahida, I'm preaching to the choir. Natick High School. Natick High School is one of the top schools in the country. And that's not an easy feat to do. So we're talking about the district of best teachers. This is a rating, according to some of the, the overall rating from the Department of Education. Best school district for athletes in Massachusetts is number 4. Best school district in Massachusetts is number 20 of 220. District with the best teachers, number 24 of 239. 6 elementary schools in Natick Public Schools. And the new building in Natick, which was built in August of 2012, $78 million. And so the Natick Public Schools is a top-rated public school and has 5,529 students in grades PK, K through 12, pre-kindergarten PK. And the student-teacher ratio is 13:1. When we talk about Black teachers overall, we have 290,000 Black teachers in America. But out of the percentage of all of the teachers, 7% of the teachers are, self-identified as Black or African American, 2% Black male teachers, 20% of public school teachers identify as teachers of color, but there's only 7% that identify as Black as of January 5th, 2022 in the Hetching reports. And for those of you who don't know, and so I have to do research constantly, Susie King Taylor, 1848 to 1912, was the first Black teacher. And she was a first Black teacher who was recognized as a Black teacher openly in a school of former slaves. She was born a slave on a plantation in Georgia, and she later lived with her grandmother, and her grandmother greatly influenced her education. So Susie King Taylor, that's something that now you can tell people. Susie King Taylor is the first recognized Black teacher in the United States. So when I talked to my dear friend, Deborah Mitchell Younger, about Natick, I remember when she moved to Natick, because she was talking about moving, and it was around schools and public schools and what she wanted for her daughter and what she wanted a better life for herself. And so I remember this because I met her here in Boston, in Greater Metro Boston, and I remember the struggles that she was having. And so for those of us at the time, I think when I first met her, I didn't have a child. I don't think I did, or maybe I did, because I've known her that long. So, but I remember both of us, all of us. And here's the theme song. The theme that I saw on the top of this flyer was "We Are All the Same." So in one way we are, in terms of our human experience, and another way we're not. We talk about the melting pot of the United States. Well, when you look at it, it's more like a salad. Somebody's a tomato, somebody's a piece of kale, somebody's lettuce, somebody's an onion, but it all makes a salad. So I can't say that my Blackness is not an intricate part of me. So I've heard people say, oh, I don't see color. Well, if you don't see color, then you don't see me. So I'm going to push back a little bit, but also honor the fact that I know in this room, we're all different. out of all the 8 billion people in the world, everyone's different, just like a snowflake. We've all got different fingerprints. We've got different giftings, different anointings. We've got different eyelashes. As much as people try to be the same when they want to follow celebrities, you can't do it because God is just that wonderful. So I'm going to tell you up front, I'm a Christian. I've been a Christian since I was 23, and I became a Christian when I was a student at Northeast University. And Northeast University is an amazing place where all people of all colors, all faiths, all ethnicities, countries, languages come together. And I'm currently a doctoral candidate in education in the School of Professional Studies at Northeastern University. I have 2.5 master's degrees. So a master's degree in management, a master's degree in education, and I was halfway through getting my master's degree in public health when I experienced and survived 3 strokes. So I born and raised in Boston, mother African-American, father African-American. My mother was one of 17 kids. All my grandparents are Southerners. My father was raised in Philly, and my father was a Black activist who, along with Ellen Jackson and Ruth Batson, actually organized Operation Exodus, which became METCO. So even though I didn't originally go to school at Northeast University undergrad for education, I went for business management because I was always into music, and my father was a musician. And I saw the most talented people broke. Some of our greatest musicians died broke. And so I was determined to be the business person in the group of musicians and of artists. And so I went from going to Boston Public Schools to being, to graduate from Beaver Country Day School. Beaver Country Day School is one of the elite private schools, college prep schools in the country. And so I recently went to my 50th year reunion. I graduated in 72 last weekend. And almost didn't go because I was feeling nauseous. I physically was feeling sick about even thinking about going back there. And so I had to unpack that and the fact that I experienced some of the most traumatic events in my life there at Beaver Country Day School. I went to Beaver from the 6th grade to the 12th grade, and I graduated from there. But in the 9th grade, my father was murdered. He was assassinated. And my father was one of the people that organized Operation Exodus, which became METCO, but he philosophically started distancing himself from what is now 50 years later still METCO, because he said, this is only supposed to be a temporary solution as we build our own schools and as we reform the institutions. 50 years later, the schools are just as segregated, and that's countrywide. Boston right now is facing a morass. I'll use one of those fancy words, a morass of chaos in the Boston public schools because the Department of Education, elementary and secondary education, is threatening a takeover of the Boston Public School Department. And that decision is going to come down within days of whether or not the state is really going to put all of BPS in receivership, which means that the school committee will have no more power. Boston Public Schools is looking for a new superintendent after Brenda Cassellius has been, it's controversial, pushed out, fired, left, whatever, a combination of things. She's leaving in June. And right now there's a search committee for the replacement superintendent, and Mayor Michelle Wu has said that she wants a permanent replacement, not an interim replacement. And so there's an active search committee in the midst of a referendum, a non-binding referendum that took place in November of last year, 2021, where 99,000 Boston voters said they wanted to return to an elected school committee. Boston, which is the capital of Massachusetts, as you know, is the only school committee that is appointed, not elected, in all of the school committees in Massachusetts. So there's an ongoing fight with that. 7,000 students have actually left in the last year from Boston Public Schools and gone different places. And so I say this because this mirrors the parents in Boston Public Schools voting with their feet of where they want their kids to go to school. For those of you who are homeowners, You may have selected your home based on, if you have children, what the quality of the school system is like. And so Deborah, like many people, have left Boston to go to Newton, to go to Natick, to go to Wellesley, to become part of Medco, to become part of the charter school system, the Catholic school system, the private school system, the homeschool system, because basically we're all the same in that we want the best life that we can have on this human existence on this side of the grave for us and for our children and our children's children's children.
Sharon, could you say what Metco is? Maybe some people don't know what Metco is on this call. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. So throughout history, different people have had to go to the courts to get remedies against discrimination and segregation. And so, as many of you know, this history has a very ugly, this country has a very ugly history regarding African Americans and descendants of Africans, specifically around slavery. And some of the vestiges of slavery, we don't have enough time to go into the 13th Amendment and how slavery was abolished, except for if you are incarcerated, if you're imprisoned, if you become, you know, a property of the state by being labeled a criminal. And then there's never been justice in terms of the criminal justice system here for African Americans, Native Americans, people of color, indigenous people. There are still stories of hundreds of Native, First Nation and Native children being mass buried around schools that we're trying to get rid of them being Native, them being Native American children and Native American citizens. Well, that same thing happened with Black Americans here. And I'll say African Americans are descendants of slaves because you can be Black and not be African American. So I'm making that distinction. When we say Black Lives Matter, I think it's a throwback to the 60s in which all of us were looking for liberation. All of us people were looking for liberation. I am a product of the civil rights movement. My father was a Black nationalist. My great-grandfather was a follower of Marcus Garvey, a Garveyite. So on my father's side, it was very much about self-determination, about Black people, African Americans, standing up for ourselves, doing for ourselves. And so up until the mid to late 70s, that was the case. But there have been governmental policies and legislation that has continuously hindered the progress of Black people in this country. So there's a difference. I'm differentiating between Black people in this country, African American people, descendants of slaves, because they're our legislative pieces, 1954, I was born in 55, 1954, Brown versus Board of Education was the legislation that came down from the Supreme Court that said that separate education is not equal. I'm paraphrasing. You can't be separate and unequal education is inherently unequal. And that was basically the legislation that said that we are going to integrate schools. 1974, Judge Garrity in Boston instituted desegregation in Boston, which incorporated busing, and there was a whole violent reaction by people who were not Black. And it wasn't just Caucasians, it was people that were not Black, to incorporating Black students and Black people in their schools. And so the discussion was, we want neighborhood schools, we don't want our kids bused to other schools. That's part of it. But the original suit was based around gentrification and based around the formula for funding schools, Boston Public Schools, which is based on property and property tax. And so basically African Americans were saying the money that we're spending to pay for our public school education is not educating my child. So originally it was around land and property, which is why this country was established. You know, America was around land and property. We're taking your land, and Black folks are property. I mean, I'm just breaking it down like on a history level. And everybody was not included in the Constitution. All white people, Caucasian people were not included because women were not included. And if you didn't own property, you were not included. So you could be a white male, and if you came from Ireland, you weren't included. You could be a white male, and if you didn't own any property, you weren't included. So the we the people wasn't we all the people. Metco was a direct response to Boston Public Schools taking to rectify the segregation, literally segregation. Up north, it was de facto segregation. Down south was actual segregation. You literally walked in places and the signs were there, white only, colored only. We weren't Negroes back then, or Black people, African Americans, we were colored. And so it was like that down south, but up south, up north, there was de facto segregation. So those same attitudes and policies were demonstrated, were exemplified, were carried out by the act of not being able to get into school, not being able to go to a library. I am old enough to remember going to downtown Boston and people not wanting to open the door, literally to a store. Or if you wanted to look at something in the case, they wouldn't take it out of the case because they didn't want you to touch it. Growing up in Roxbury, Dorchester, I remember having to fight, physically fight. If you went over an imaginary line, Columbia Road, that was heading towards down South Boston. I worked in Columbia Point in the youth program there, and the drug program there. And Columbia Point was its own culture. But if you went there and you went to Carson Beach and you went to certain parts in Carson Beach, you had to fight your way back. And I was also part of the demonstration along with Bill Owens and Tom Atkins to desegregate Carson Beach along with Columbia Road residents and Black and white and Latino allies. So I remember those fights. I remember SWAT being on top of the project housing buildings, looking down on us when residents of the community wanted to fight back. So there's historically in this country, contrary to what is in the textbooks, Africans have always fought back. Africans and Black people in this country have always resisted, have always fought back, have always wanted to be free, and always wanted our children to be free. The first response, one of the first major responses after the Emancipation Proclamation was Black people looking for their families. And most Black children were raised by both of their parents up to the mid 70s. And then crack came, and then the welfare policy of you can live in this public housing, but you can't have your husband there, you can't have your man there. So, you know, on top of the drug policies, on top of governmental policies that didn't enforce, down that were made to people of color in this country that were that were not held up or that were turned around, literally turned around and went back on people's words, the government's words. After the Emancipation Proclamation, there was the edict saying that everybody is free, but there were Native Americans in the Midwest that didn't tell their slaves until 2 years later. And so that's part of Juneteenth. And the day that we really celebrate where all African Americans here were deemed free. So when you hear Juneteenth, that's what that is about. The actual our celebration saying that African Americans in this country are supposedly free. But with that free, you can listen to some of the slave narratives that the Workers' Project did from the government, that literally in their own voices talked about they turned us out like animals. We didn't have anything. We just had the clothes on our back. We didn't have any land. We didn't have any animals. And so those same freed enslaved people had to go back to the same people and try to get jobs, because you had the 13th Amendment that said if you weren't employed, you could be arrested. And so Black people were arrested. The backlash and the response was Black people were arrested and put in jail. And so now you had to work for free until you're dead, because you weren't even valued as a human being. You were incarcerated, and they could work you to your death with no accountability. The prison industrial system, which still exists to this day. The United States has 2.5 million people incarcerated, more than any other industrialized country in this globe, in this world. And so when we talk about freedom, when we talk about liberation, it is never legislatively applied to Black people without struggle. And so I welcome the allies here that are about Black Lives Matter. I mean, George Floyd was a more recent, and by the way, I have never watched that video, and I won't watch that video. I refuse to watch that, because once you put it in your head, you cannot remove it. And so the video of George Floyd being murdered, to me, was reminiscent of those postcards that white supremacists took when Black people were being lynched and literally sold around the country, when people's skin and people's sexual parts, people's fingers and toes and everything were put in jars on the counters of some of these stores, these country stores down south. They didn't do it up south, but they did do it down south. And so there are the Metco was a direct response for Black parents to get a quality education for their kids without waiting for, because we don't get a do-over with our kids. If your child is going through K through 12, you don't want them repeating K through 12.
So,
You have to do the best, you have to do the best that you can do with your child there. So the response to Black Lives Matter was George Floyd. Thank you, Yahaya. I just gave you tons of chills, girl. Yes. So I want to say, round the story out with a bit of encouragement, because you can be traumatized with this stuff over and over again. And so Metco and Ellen Jackson and Jean McGuire, who's a good friend of mine, these people saw me when I was a baby around my father. And so I've grown up in the movement. I formed the first Black student union at Beaver Country Day School. And I've heard recently that some of the students there want to start another Black student union at Beaver Country Day School. I started Black Teachers Matter in response to my own unfair treatment as a result of me being a teacher at a charter school. And, you know, we talk about God a lot, but it was really God that made that happen. My students supported me. The brief story, I was working, and I have a non-disclosure agreement. So we're going to do this conversation like Vegas to a certain extent.
oh, you're being recorded, so.
No, that's okay. Because I won't name the school, but I was working as an 8th grade ELA social studies teacher at a charter school. And I basically, you know, wanted to work there because my daughter was in a charter school. And working in colleges and universities, I taught for 18 years at Springfield College and 12 years at Northeastern University as the academic advisor and adjunct faculty at both. And I've taught at other colleges and universities. I've taught in the Boston Public Schools. I've taught in charter schools and private schools. But I knew that in the 11th and 12th grade, I wanted to spend more time with my child. And if she was in a charter school and I was teaching in a charter school, when she was off, I was off. And then so the 11th and 12th grade, I would be off. She'd graduate, we'd go to Disney. I'd teach one more year and get rid of all my student loans, then move on. That's what I thought. That's not what happened. I was terminated with no evidence, unjustifiably. And so I was gonna walk away. And then I got the word from a former coworker that my students found out what happened to me, and they staged a protest. And so, you know, I thought, well, if these kids are gonna fight for me and fight for Black teachers, what example am I setting for them, for me not showing them how to fight and how to do it correctly within the system, if possible, but at least to stand up to say this is wrong. And I believe as an elder, that's part of my responsibility. As an educator, that's part of my responsibility, to teach. So I went, and that next Monday, because I was teaching on a Saturday, that's when I got the word. And I went that Monday, and I really early when the buses came, and I talked to my students, and they were like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm okay. Don't I look okay?" They told us that you were sick. We thought that you left because you didn't love us anymore. And it was all these lies. And at that point, you know, I prayed about it. And then I went down to Target and got my little arts and crafts thing and put my first sign, Black Teachers Matter, with red, black, and green, and stood there and protested for months. And so that's how it started unofficially. And officially, the height of the pandemic, 2020, my daughter had graduated from UMaine. That was the pandemic. There were no commencements. There were no graduations and for public school or colleges. And so I was sitting there watching television, and people were, you know, overcoming COVID and the car caravans with the balloons and the banners. And I said, well, who's celebrating our kids? And my kid, I mean, we spent 4 years, and I was looking forward to putting a cap and gown and taking some pictures, and it's not going to happen. And God literally said, you do it, which I laughed. Because I said, you want me to organize like a car caravan, and I don't even have a car. That's like crazy. That would be God. And so, long story short, I put, just like Deb put out the invitation for people to join Black Lives Matter in Natick, I put out the I put out the invitation for people to join this caravan to celebrate our kids. And with no money, no car, just an idea and the internet. And over 40 organizations came together. We had over 70 vehicles, including and the mayor at that time, Mayor Marty Walsh, Superintendent Brenda Casillas, Deputy Commissioner Bill Gross, who was a commissioner of Boston Public Police, and Keith Green, who is the head of the MBTA Police, and several main streets, Grove Hall main streets, Mission Hill main streets, the main streets, groups, organizations from the neighborhoods in Boston. We all came together, and T-shirts, balloons, flyers, and everything. And for a day, we took a trip, a caravan in a circle, starting at Mattapan Station, and celebrated all our kids. And at each Main Street stop, we had congratulations, graduates of 2020. And so that's how community can come together with allies. The other story, and before I take questions and comments from you guys, is when I went back to my 50th reunion, and I told you I felt sick. I mean, I literally not, and I wasn't going to go because I hadn't gone to any other reunions before that. And I wasn't going to do this one, but I had to unpack, why do I feel so sick? Why am I having such a reaction? And when I realized the trauma that I went through, the cultural distancing that I went through, going from a public school, co-ed, multicultural, to a private school, all female, wealthy, all girls, was traumatic in and of itself. The cultural shift, and Deborah and I talked about this earlier, the cultural shift from being in Boston, Roxbury, Dorchester to Natick, because it does take you out of, your comfort zone, and it takes you out of what you grew up with, what you know, but you still want to be successful. You still want the best. How do you do that? And so I hadn't gone back there because I was still who my parents made me. I was still a Black activist, didn't know it. I was different, knew that. In my class of 80, there were only 4 Black girls. 3 of us came back for the reunion, and one of us, we all talked. All of us went through hell. I went through particular hell because my father was murdered in the 9th grade. And I found out on the first floor of that school building that my father had been gunned down. I didn't find out until later that day he had actually been murdered. But I found that out in that school. And my classmates' response was to form a scholarship and fundraise. And they raised $10,000 in response to my father getting murdered. These were all of my white classmates and some of my Black classmates. When we went back to the reunion, we didn't see the scholarship. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't find it, disappeared. We didn't know if it ever went to a Black student. We didn't know if it was ever awarded. And so my classmates came together, because this was a 2-day reunion, last Friday and last Saturday. And on Saturday, one of my classmates came to me and said, I couldn't sleep when you recounted all the stuff that happened to you in school. We just saw you as being angry, but we didn't know all the reasons why. And you scared us. I was 13, but I scared them as a 13-year-old in response to my father's murder. And I told them, I said, I was angry. I was angry at everybody. I was even angry at my father for dying. The fact that you guys internalized this and thought it was just about you, it wasn't about you. I was a kid trying to survive in an unfamiliar environment. I wasn't being accepted by my community anymore, because I was, you're being like a white girl, because I'm being educated at this elite school. You're trying to be a white girl, which is crazy, being intelligent, being affiliated with anything, gender or whatever. But I was going through that because there was a distance between just me being in the neighborhood. I was going early morning in the bus and coming home late in the afternoon, like a lot of Metco students were doing. I wasn't in Metco, but and then the last act of racism from that school that claimed to want Black students was they put a letter in my file that said I had a hatred for white people and a disdain for authority. That was in my transcript. And even though I graduated the top 5 percentile of my class, I was not talked to by any of the colleges or universities. in an environment where I was trained to go to a college or university and competed successfully to be in the top 5 percentile. I didn't find that out until I went for my master's degree, and a Black woman in admissions said, there's a letter that's in your file that you should see. So on top of being devastated by the murder of my father, who is the reason I went to this school, because my father always esteemed education. Remember, he was one of the developers, the founders of Operation Exodus, which became MECO. So he always believed that. And I completed and graduated from that school because of my dad. So the next day, when my classmates said to me, "That's horrible what happened. Thank you for sharing your heart," I decided I'm going to personally replenish this $10,000 myself and reestablish the scholarship. And you can name it after your father. And let's talk about that. And then her mom heard about it, and her mom donated $10,000. I don't know if you know how much you know about Beaver Country Day School, but last weekend reminded me how wealthy my classmates are. I forgot that I was going to school with one of the family members of Kraft Jelly, Half and Rougher Beer, Hyatt, Amy Hyatt, my classmate, Hyatt Hotels. That's the level of wealth that's in my class. And so when we look at the level of wealth of Natick, when you look at the cost of homes in Natick, when you look at what people are paying just for homes, and Natick school budget is based on taxes as well. There's a reason Natick school system is better, is because you have more money to be able to pay for resources. At Beaver Country Day School, if you were a student that had a particular interest, they found the money. Boston Public Schools, you have to justify it by the numbers of students, the cost per pupil. Natick, you do the same thing, but there's more money. There's a bigger pot. At Beaver Country Day School, if you were one student that had an interest in something, they found you the resources. They found you. Now, Beaver Country Day School, notably, is $58,000 a year right now. So they have the money to do that. But Boston Latin has an endowment that has $64 million, and that's a Boston public school. And so that they don't have to share with the other Boston public schools. So you put your money where your heart is. You guys' heart is to identify with your fellow human beings that happen to be Black, happen to be African American, happen to be possibly Native American, Latino American, or Latina. But we as human beings, we're all the same in terms of human beings. We're not the same in terms of the human experience. And so I'm encouraging you to lean in and find out what that means to be an ally. Actually, let's change that from ally to co-conspirator. I don't need allies that just agree with the sentiment of what we're doing, that Black teachers matter. There's research that shows that Black teachers matter, not just to Black students, but also to all students. Black teachers, if a Black student has an encounter with a Black teacher as early as the 3rd grade, their possibilities and percentages of going to college raises up by about 14%. Their possibilities and percentages of whether or not they'll complete high school increase dramatically. If they see 2 Black teachers during their elementary education, the success rate of the college completion is 40%. Black teachers matter. I'm as a Black teacher, there's a different way that I teach. There's a different way that my students receive me, whether they're Black or white, but particularly the Black students who see me in a position of authority, in a position of respect. And the white students and Latino students need to see that too, the importance and the respect of a Black person in that position. Across the world, teachers are renowned, are respected. Not in the United States, it's kind of rough, especially public schools. Just recently, I heard about a teacher, a student throwing hot water from ramen noodles in a teacher's face. This was in Boston Public Schools a couple of days ago. And there are stories about teachers having to fight or being attacked. It's not as much, but it should never happen at all. And that's because of the lack of respect that this country has for educators. Educators, yes, we get the summers off. No other job do you get that. But look at the work that we're doing. We're not just being asked to teach. We're being asked to be behavioral psychologists, to be disciplinarians, to be co-parents, to be psychiatrists to a certain extent, to be, you know, pseudo policemen and cops, because you're regulating behavior, and behavior that may or may not be in the home, may or may not be in the neighborhood. And I say may or may not because you cannot assume just because someone's going to a public school that they're from an urban system that they don't have that discipline. And I hear that from white teachers. Oh, well, you know, their home life. And they don't know anything about their home life. Oh, you know, they come from Dorchester, they come from Roxbury. That's one of the most racist things I hear. And these are from people that consider themselves allies. So if those of you remember John Brown was a co-conspirator. He didn't just believe that slavery was an evil. He and his sons actually participated and organized an insurrection to free Black slaves. He lost his life, his sons lost his life, but he was a co-conspirator. So we need people who are in spaces like Natick, like BPS, like Chicago, whose 12,000 Black teachers were pushed out of the Chicago public schools by Rahm Emanuel, who was actually put in position by President Obama. So just because you have people who identify as Black, so we have a saying, I'm gonna let y'all in on something, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. So just because they look like us, doesn't mean they have that. See, there go Miss Peggy, she covering her mouth, but she heard it. We are in a situation where as human beings, we're threatened with the whole planet, killing everything human. COVID was global. COVID was global. And COVID doesn't care if you're Black, white, old, young, slip sliding, flying, or gliding. It will kill you. It will kill you regardless of where it came from. Now, because of health disparities and racism in the medical system and the history of racial discrimination and apartheid in the medical system, unfortunately, a large percentage of African Americans are like, no, I'm not taking that shot. No, because we're tired of being experimented on. And there's historical data and there's research that shows that through research, Black folks have been experimented on. Native American women, Latino women have been experimented on. The first gynecologist, the father of gynecology, experimented on Black slave women with no anesthesiology.
So Ms. Hinton, I want to just jump in for a second because we do have part 2. I want you to save some of this. Because we got part 2 coming up in June.
I'm an educator, so I'm sorry. I'm just trying to,
listen,
you know.
Listen, you are the best, and I love to hear you talk. That's why I'm sorry to interrupt you. But I just wanted to know what your father's name was. And I also
Cornell Eaton.
I want to hear from Miss Peg because she put me in Medco, and I want to hear her perspective as a elder, a senior. We have to give our ancestors their due. And you coming back for Black Teachers Matter Part 2. You ain't getting off the hook, sis.
I guess so.
All right, go ahead, Miss Peg, and then you come back to us, Ms. Hinton.
Deborah, can I pop in? We got about
Go ahead.
15 minutes left, so please make the questions quick. I know we have a couple of other people may want to ask questions.
My question is to my mother. She's my mother, and her name is Margaret Younger. I want to recognize Joey from Advocates of Framingham. Joey, welcome. Mental health clinician. Ralph is my nephew. Marie was on, and Tom, co-conspirator and treasurer of Native Black Lives Matter. So go ahead, Ma. Let's hear some perspective from you on the Medco and on what some of the things, and then Tom, come back in and let us know when we have a moment to say, to have Ms. Hinton come back in or any other questions. Go ahead, Mom.
Oh, first of all, I'm sorry that I have to wait till June for part 2, right? Because this part 1 was so good, Sharon.
Thank you.
Right? So good, right? And how is your daughter and everything, you know? But I just want to say that I was in awe. I don't have a question. I was just in awe with how you put stuff out there, stuff that I already went through, right? In the education system, they all went to Medco, except she was in Latin and begged Debbie was in Latin school and begged me to let her go with her sisters in Lexington, right?
Yes.
And I took her out of Latin, right, and let her go but my point is, education is primo for me, right? I mean, for because you could never take that away from anyone. You know, what you know is what you know, and it's in your head, unless so that's one thing. You know, you could give kids a car and a bunch of money and stuff, but and it took me a while to get my kids settled in a school because there was so many no, when I tried to get them into some kind of private school system. They just weren't eligible, right? And I know your mother, right? In fact, me and your mother, I can't remember, we did something together work-wise, and I know your father. And I remember that time of period that you talked about, right? Because that hit the whole community, probably the whole world too, right? But I'm so glad to see you, right? I can't wait for June, right? And she's got this recorded. There was so much information in what you had to give, right? And I just thank you so much. I lived it. You know, you're telling my story.
Yeah.
All right. Bye-bye, Sharon. Talk to you.
Thank you. Don't go anywhere, Miss Peg.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you so much for remembering my dad. You know, there's a saying, it's African and Native American. As long as you say the name of your ancestors, they'll never really be dead.
Oh yeah, nah, I believe that.
Right. And
believe
so
that.
when we look at the people whose shoulders we stand on, a lot of them don't have names. And so one of the reasons, you know, Black Teachers Matter exists, and I talked about the commencement caravan that we did. There were some of my students that had been at that charter school who protested for me, who were in that parade along with their mom. And so I said to them, I said, you know, this organization exists because of you. Because if you guys hadn't protested, I would have just kept walking and kept teaching at Springfield and kept moving. But when I saw the fire in you, I couldn't walk away from that. And so it's because you guys that Black Teachers Matter exists. And then the next day, a friend of mine from DC said, let's make this official, make it official 501c3, because you've been doing this for a while, but this can be much bigger. And let's organize the paperwork. And so June of 2020, that's when Black Teachers Matter became an actual official nonprofit organization. And this past weekend, I'm now in contact with my classmates around this scholarship fund and this endowment fund as a response to what happened to my dad, and white allies now, people who are allies now, who said they were afraid of me then when I was a kid, who have now said, we're going to become co-conspirators with you in what you're doing with Black teachers, in the professional development, in the training, in the providing the resources, in the providing the books. Because yes, my father said, if you're going to be a thief, steal a book, because thieves always get caught. But make sure when you steal the book that you read the book, because they can't take what was put in your head. And so I always remember that. And so what is being put in our kids' heads, and the fact that 13 states have actually passed legislation against critical race theory, which is basically American history. We're saying that we want to include everybody's history, Latinos, Asians, Native Americans, Black people in this country. Let's be a reflection. And Howard Zinn, who's now passed away, but has a book, The People's History of the United States, which includes everyone's history. So critical race theory is the teaching of real history and the real story about that. So we formed a coalition with the teachers who have recently, last 3 weeks, filed a class action lawsuit in Chicago against Chicago public schools that pushed out 12,000 Black teachers. We formed alliances with the teachers in Atlanta who are 7 years into fighting, going to prison for 25 years, supposedly for inflating grades. I know murderers that don't go to prison for 25 years. Are you kidding me? So there's an all-out assault on teachers of color, especially if you speak more than one language, because we have a whole host of English language learners who literally can't learn because it's not in their language. It's not in their first language. and it's not being translated. So United States used to be one of the leading countries for education, and we're slipping behind. And to me, it's a national security issue, which is how Black Lives Matter, Black Teachers Matter actually involves everyone. If we are not educating our populace to be the new scientists, the doctors, the lawyers, the teachers teach everybody else. I have students now. One of my board members, who's the president of my board, used to be a student of mine at Northeastern University. He is now a father of 4, the head of his own nonprofit organization. He's building schools on the reservation in South Dakota. This is who we have in this organization. We've partnered with people teaching, Cameroon. We partner with people in Africa who are teaching how to grow, and they're so successful at it that some of their products are products of Cameroon. We've got teachers that have school in Ghana. One of the people that knew my father has a school in Ghana, and it's been there for 20 years. So we're partnering with teachers all across the country. We did 2 forums. I know we've got 8 minutes, Tom. I hear you. We partnered with teachers across the country. The first, one of the teachers forums that we had this year in February, Black History Month, was what's going on with Black teachers. And over 200 people registered for that forum as far as Dubai and Prague. And I was like, wait a minute, Dubai and Prague, are you serious? Unfortunately, I had to block 30 racists who were making comments on our Facebook page, and I wasn't going to argue with them. It's like, you believe what you believe. This is America. You can say what you say. There's consequences, but you're not going to say it here. This is our Facebook page. You can say it someplace else. So unfortunately, I was telling somebody yesterday, my goal is really to be a change in this country so that we don't have to have a Black Lives Matter. We don't have to have a Black Teachers Matter. Everybody recognizes the humanity of each person in our individualness, in our uniqueness, and wants the best for everybody else. You want your child to be able to learn next to a Black child, a Latino child, learn the different languages, the different cultures, the different foods, because we're human beings on this planet. And if we don't come together, we are not going to survive. We literally are not going to survive. We have to be able to come together and communicate with each other and understand the pain of the poor white family in the Adirondacks of Western Virginia that are there. Some of their kids are hooked on meth. So my friend Jahida has been fighting down there with another friend of mine on Mass and Cass for those people over the last 6 years, if not more, over the opioid addiction. It became an election issue for the elected officials back then, but she's been fighting this fight forever because she's looking at her kids. She's looking at the students that could possibly get stuck with needles on the playground at Orchard Gardens. And so she went beyond and is still continuing to go beyond what she's doing as a person, as a human being, and becoming an activist and making an election issue and I went past there yesterday, literally drove past there yesterday. The tents are coming back. There are still people out there that are addicted to opioids. There are still people out there that are being raped and sexually assaulted and stuff in Mass and Cass after this big, huge election thing saying that the mayor has done it. The work continues. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And in the remaining 6 minutes, I'm open to answering any of the questions. I saw, Tom, that you're residing in Nipmuc land. And so I saw that. And so one of the parts of the education is my daughter and I, because we have Cherokee and we have Blackfoot on both sides of our family. We don't celebrate Thanksgiving. We go down to the day of mourning in Plymouth and we celebrate with our Native brothers and sisters and lift up the voice of our people. And so, that education, to undo the miseducation of myself and my people and my children and my students, I'm constantly learning because things change. And so it's my job as an elder, as a mother, as another human being to say, look, this is my part of the human experience. Let's join together so we have a better human experience. Amen. That's my sermon. I'm sticking to it.
Thank you.
Got 5 minutes. Oh, there was another thing too. Somebody said I joined Natick. This was you, Tom.
Yeah.
Because I want to help fight white superiority complex by being an ally. You can, and so I invite you to be a co-conspirator. Let's kick it up a notch, not just an ally, but a co-conspirator. So you actually, and the difference is And as an ally, you're allowed to be a bystander and say, oh, that's horrible. And you do a couple of things. A co-conspirator is actually working with us to dismantle white supremacy, to dismantle that white superiority complex. And it's steps that you can take. And as a teacher, I can teach you and help you become stronger co-conspirators and not just allies.
Very good.
Yeah,
Joey and Ralph, do you have any questions?
No, I have a question.
All right, Deborah, go.
Sharon, I started African-American Saturday School.
You were telling me that.
And you reminded me and that I was a teacher. I forgot that I used to teach as well. I was child studies major at Tufts. I had some mental health issues, but that I don't let that stop me. God is with me. Black mental health matters, right? That's why Joey's on, and he's a big and but Sharon, I used to teach in the Bell Font. What is that, Bell? And I just remember those kids were transformed. As teachers, it's a transformative job. So I want to thank you for coming, and I'm going to let Tom, co-conspirator, close us out. If you have any final comments, we'll see you next month.
My only comment is this was amazing.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to being taught to be a co-conspirator. I was born and raised in Dorchester, but not in the environment you were in. So it'd be very interesting to talk about our history and everything with you. I would really enjoy that.
Awesome.
So I will talk to you later.